Hello. Today we are going to continue with the themes of the gospel writers. And today we're going to begin with John, or the last one is John. His theme is Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. The Gospel of John had evangelistic purposes and also to prove that the Messiahship of Jesus. While Luke emphasized humanity of Jesus, John emphasizes the deity of Jesus. John chapter 20, verse 31 says, quote, "But these are written that ye may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life in his name." The goal, John's goal was to provide the church a tool for evangelism, and he also wanted to strengthen the faith of those who already believed. Beginning with Andrew, John in his gospel, his proclamation, Andrew's proclamation, quote, "We have found the Messiah," in John 1, chapter 1, verse 41. The gospel writer, he parades an ensemble of witnesses and wonders to prove that Jesus was indeed the anointed one. Shortly after Andrew appeared, Nathanael calls him, quote, this is in John chapter 1, verse 49, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God, you are the King of Israel." Martha too calls him this, repeating that he is the Son of God, even he that came into the world, in John 11:27. In short, the Gospel of John portrays Jesus as the prophetic Messiah, the royal Messiah. His emphasis on the miracles and the passion narrative would allow especially unbelieving Jews to realize that he was indeed the Messiah they had been waiting for. Luke emphasized, as I said, the humanity of the Messiah, and John emphasizes his deity. Luke was concerned with showing Jesus to be fully human. John's concern was to show he was fully God. By the time he wrote his gospel, Matthew, Mark, and Luke already had a wide circulation. Decades would pass before John chooses to write his gospel, while the three gospels preceding his were written to specific ethnic audiences. Remember, Jews. Matthew wrote to Jews, Mark to Romans, and Luke to Greeks. John's gospel was written for the church at large and to unbelievers, so that they could be convinced that Jesus was the Messiah. He concentrated on adding details that the other three Gospels writers had left out. A large body of material in the Gospel of John is not found in Matthew, Mark, or Luke. While Mark was mostly interested in what Jesus did, John was more interested in what Jesus taught. There are sermons and discourses in his gospel not found in other gospel narratives. John has sub-themes. The first one, there are two. The first is the conflict of light and darkness. John uses terms such as light, darkness, night, day. He sometimes made statements that seem irrelevant unless you recognize that it is his sub-theme. For example, John recorded that after Jesus identified Judas as the betrayer at the last Passover, Judas left, and John added the phrase, quote, "and it was night," in John chapter 13, verse 30. Obviously, it was night. Passover is always observed at night, never in the daytime. It seems to be an irrelevant statement, except it is part of the apostles' sub-theme on the conflict of light and darkness. John was not just making a statement of fact that it was night outside. That was obvious. The point is that Judas himself was, quote, of the night and of the darkness, quote. The deed he was about to do was not a deed, quote, of the light or of the day. The second sub-theme in the Gospel of John is that the Messiah came for the purpose of being the Father's revealer. That explains why the apostles spent much more time on what Jesus taught. In all of his sermons and discourses and teachings, he revealed the nature of the Father to man. There are a pattern of sevens in the Gospel of John, and that's notable. It records things in sevens, specifically 7 miracles Jesus performed, 7 discourses Jesus gave, and 7 I am statements Jesus made. John's prologue and the word logos or word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This concept of the Word, there are philosophies of the Greeks, and Philo, who was a philosopher of that day, and there's also a concept of the logos or the Word in rabbinic theology. The emphasis of John's prologue, meaning the first several verses, is that the pre-existence, Jesus was pre-existent. The apostle used the term word as a title or a name, and he seemed to assume that the reader would understand the significance of it. Therefore, the usage of logos or the word in this way must have been a familiar concept to first century. There are 3 possible sources of John's concept. The first is Greek philosophy. Number 2, the writings of Philo, and 3, rabbinic theology. Of course, we're going to go with the third option. But there was a concept, the word logos, right, which is Greek for word in English, that had a concept. Commentaries tried to show that John revealed how the Messiah came to fulfill the goals of Greek philosophy in both of these areas. One, that Jesus was the very idea of God, and by speech, he was the very expression of God. And though that might be true, what these commentaries forget is that by profession, John was not a Greek philosopher, but a Jewish fisherman. Therefore, his source of info about the Logos would not come from Greek philosophy. Second possible source of the term Logos are the writings of Philo. Philo was a Hellenistic Jewish philosopher who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, and was a contemporary of both Jesus and John. Philo would try to blend Greek philosophy with Hebrew scriptures. He was not a Hebrew scholar, and he used this term as well. He used Greek philosophy to interpret Jewish scriptures, and he had an allegorical approach. Excuse me. The essence of the Logos in Philo's writings, there were 5 points. 1, The logos is the icon. That's a Greek word for the image of God. The logos is close to, and this is a Greek word, metronon, which means the closest angel to God in rabbinic angelology. The logos is a third use of that word, according to Philo, is the high priest acting as a mediator. The fourth is the paraclete, which is Greek for the Holy Spirit or comforter. And the fifth point is that the logos is not a person, but something shadowy and unreal. Okay, that's Philo's five points. We notice certain points of similarity between the writings of Philo and the Gospel of John, but similarity is not sameness. There are also strong points of dissimilarity between the two that indicate a different source for John's understanding and use of the word logos. The Greek worldview correlates with logos with universal knowledge, which is available to all through thoughtful men. The Jewish perspective equates logos with revealed wisdom. But the Galilean fishermen simply did not travel in the same circle as the Alexandrian philosopher. To find the source of his logos, we actually need to look no further than the Judaism that he grew up with, the Judaism of the land of Israel. The apostle's concept of the logos shows that he was very familiar with the Aramaic translation and interpretation of the Hebrew scriptures called the Targum. It forms a part of the Jewish traditional literature, and its inception is as early as the same time of the Second Temple, and it is the Syrian tongue or language, Aramaic. And I believe they would have used that during their time in Babylon. So in the Targumim, Targumim, the translators use the word, and I like the sound of this word, memra. And the Targumic usage of this word is where we find the source of John's logos. Lo and behold. In rabbinic theology, memra is an Aramaic term that means word. It is a translation of the Hebrew term, here's another word, davar, D-A-V-A-R. When John wrote his gospel in Greek, he needed a word to express this concept of memra, and the only Greek term he could use was logos. So the word memra is Aramaic, the word davar is Hebrew, logos is Greek, and word is English. John is thinking in terms of the Jewish theology of that day, not in terms of Greek philosophy. Okay, there are six theological truths about the memra word. 1, and the introduction of the Gospel of John has all 6 of these truths. Sometimes the memra was distinct from God, but at other times the same as God. They never tried, Hebrew theologians, sages, never tried to explain this obvious paradox. How is it possible for the memra to be distinct from God, yet at the same time to be God. They taught both statements as true and left it there. They didn't try to explain it. John did the same thing in the first verse of his gospel. Listen to this. When he stated that, quote, the Logos was with God, he made him distinct from God. And when he stated next that the Logos was God, the Word was God, making him, the Word, the same as God. Like the rabbis, John did not try to explain the paradox at this point, but simply stated this as being true. Later in his writings, John explained these seemingly contradictory statements in terms of the Trinity. Only in terms of the Trinity can that paradox be explained. Second point of the Memra, the Word of God, is the agent of creation. Whenever God created anything, he did so by means of his Memra, his Word. Everything that exists does so because of his Memra. Without the Memra, nothing that exists would exist. So the Memra, the Word, was the agent of creation and active in the beginning. In Genesis chapter 1, when God simply said, "Let there be," stating this positively, all things were made through him. And now negatively, it stated that without him was not anything made that has been made. The role of the Son in creation is also found in Colossians chapter 1, verse 16, and Hebrews chapter 1, verse 2. The next point, or theological truth about the Memra, is that the Memra is the agent of salvation. Throughout the history of the Old Testament, God provided salvation by means of his Memra, his Word. Whether it was a physical salvation, such as the Exodus out of Egypt, or a spiritual salvation. The apostles' point is that the one who is the Logos, or Memra, is the agent of salvation, because John says that those who believe on him are the ones who receive their salvation. Another fourth truth about the Memra is that the Memra is the means by which God became visible. From time to time throughout the history of the Old Testament, God took on some kind of visible form. In Christian theology, these visible manifestations are referred to as theophanies. Rabbis had a different term to describe the same thing. They called it Shekinah, or the way I pronounce it, Shekinah. The Shekinah was often connected with God's glory. So the two words were frequently used together, Shekinah, glory. The Shekinah, glory of God. Throughout Old Testament history, the Shekinah came primarily in three forms: light, fire, or cloud, or some combination of the three. Another form by which God became visible was as the angel of Jehovah. Whenever one of these visible manifestations occurred, it was by means of the Memra, by means of the Word. John chapter 1, verse 14 says, "And the Word became flesh." The Word, the Logos, the Memra, that was in the beginning with God and who was God, now at a certain point in human history, took on visible form. What became visible was not intangible light, fire, or cloud. This time, God's visible manifestation became very tangible flesh. By means of the incarnation, he became human, a man of flesh and bone. Then the Gospel of John tells us that this manifestation, quote, dwelled among us, or tabernacled among us. The origin of the word Shekinah goes back to Exodus 40, where the Shekinah glory in the form of a cloud took up residence within the Holy of Holies of the tabernacle. For the next several centuries, the Memra, the Logos, dwelled, tabernacled with the people of Israel until, unfortunately, tragically, the Shekinah glory reluctantly departed from Israel in 4 stages in the days of Ezekiel, as recorded in chapter 8 to 11 of Ezekiel. Now, after 6 centuries' absence, the Shekinah glory had returned, not in the form of light, fire, or cloud, but in the form of flesh, and once again tabernacled among the people of Israel. And like the rabbis, notice how quickly John connected the Shekinah with God's glory. Quote, John 1:14 says, "And we beheld his glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth." Jesus' physical body served as a veil that covered the brightness of his glory. He looked no differently than any other male of the first century Israel. But at the transfiguration, the light came through the veil, making his garments incredibly white, and his face began to shine with the brightness of the sun on Mount Hermon. 3 of the apostles saw the brightness of his glory. Among them was John. And he quotes, and he says, quote, "We beheld his glory." He writes as an eyewitness. The Memra is the means by which God signs his covenants. Now, in the Old Testament, God made 8 specific covenants. Very interesting. I didn't know this. 3 were made with humanity in general. Now, these are Edenic, in other words, Eden, Edenic, Adamic, Adam, Adamic, and Noah, Noahic covenants, 3. But 5 were made specifically with the Jewish people: the Abrahamic, the Mosaic or Moses, the land covenant. That's a specific covenant God made with Abraham, saying, "This is your land." And then remember, God sealed that covenant by that furnace of fire coming between the sacrificial animals that were laid out. The next covenant is David, and the new covenant. All 8 were signed and sealed by means of his word, his Memra. Shekinah. The Gospel of John hints at this fact in verse 17, when John says, quote, "For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ." John 1:17. The new covenant age or dispensation of grace is based on the new covenant, which is signed and sealed by the shedding of Jesus' blood. when he died on the cross. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 1 to 10, and also verse 18. Mark chapter 14, verse 24. Jesus said this, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many." The sixth truth about the Memra is that the Memra was the agent of revelation. Whenever God revealed himself, he did so by means of the Memra, the means of the word. Whatever we know about him, we know because the Memra chose to reveal it. This is based upon many passages that say, quote, "The word of the Lord came to this prophet or that prophet." John 1:18 says, quote, "No man has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him." John 1, verse 18. The fact that the Messiah came to reveal the Father to mankind is one of John's Gospel's two sub-themes. It is through his teachings that the Messiah revealed the nature of God the Father, and as previously mentioned, John the Apostle focused his attention on this, teaching rather than Jesus' actions. Because of this sub-theme, he is the only one who recorded the event where a disciple asked Jesus this, "Show us the Father," in John 14:8. To which Jesus replied, quote, "He that has seen me has seen the Father." And that's John 14, verse 9. Everything true about the divine nature of the Father is true of the divine nature of the Son. To know the Son is to know the Father. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1 to 3 states the same point. In the past, God had revealed himself in many different ways. In these last days, he revealed himself again. Remember, the Memra is the agent of revelation. And here, he revealed himself by means of the Son, the Logos, the agent of revelation. Conclusion is, the opening verses of John's Gospel do not argue that Jesus came to fulfill the goals of Greek philosophy, but that he came to fulfill the Jewish messianic hope. I'm going to stop at this point, but we're going to continue on with this discussion next time concerning the Memra. And we're going to look at some of the rabbinic truths or statements about that. So take care. God bless.